everybody. Welcome to the Evangelist Garrett channel. An interesting narrative is emerging now with Eusebius. We'll see it unfold today particularly. In one sense, the Romans weren't the ones who had the problem with Jesus. Let's go to the Passion for a moment. If you recall, it was the Jewish leaders who went and through political machinations forced the hand of the Romans to deal with Jesus. Pilate met with him, found nothing wrong, tried to wash his hands of it. And what did the Jewish people do? They said, well, he's a traitor against Caesar, and we have no Lord but Caesar. They're dangling the carrot that they're going to be obedient to the Roman way of religious order, iconography, whereas up to now they've refused to allow anything in their temple of the sort. They've refused to give oaths of fealty to any of the Roman emperors. So they're dangling that carrot. Rome kills Jesus on the cross. Jesus rises from the dead, and an absolute storm erupts through the Levant, through North Africa, and the missionary journeys begin. It's covered in the Book of Acts. What we're talking about today is happening at the same time as what's happening in the Book of Acts. So it's very interesting in that way. Hearing about the miracles that Jesus had performed and whatnot, and given that we did the video before about how Jesus was discussed in the Roman Senate, and there already was a legislative framework for naming somebody a god. They would have had no problem naming Jesus a god. They wouldn't have thought he was the Son of God or the real God or the true God, but picture it as a feel-good proclamation that they send over to Judea. Oh, Jesus, the work you're doing there is great. Yay, and we all get the photo up. It might look something like that today. But they did not do that. The Jews were up in arms about this Jesus character, and immediately after his resurrection, the bickering between the Christian sect and the Jewish leaders began, and the Roman leaders began looking to the Jewish leaders and saying, what is going on there? Why can't you control your areas? We're going to step in and start controlling them. And that's what they did, and you saw it first in Alexandria, for example. We have the writings of a diplomat named Philo, who was a Jewish diplomat from Alexandria who went to Rome and asked for mercy from the great pain being heaped upon the Jews in Alexandria. So you almost had a situation where the Romans were cracking down on the Jews and the Jews were cracking down on the Christians. One of the first things that was happening among the Jews is that the Romans began to install their signs, pictures, paintings, statues, and symbols in the Jewish temples, just like had happened at the end of the Old Testament. There's a period of roughly about 430 years between the Old and New Testaments. One of the apocryphal books, called 1st and 2nd Maccabees, tells the story of Antiochus Epiphanes, who put a statue of himself in the Jewish temple for it to be worshipped, right? And the Jews overcame that. However, here it is again, and now it's happening on a mass scale. What we're seeing now in the weeks and months after the resurrection, as the Book of Acts is unfolding, is the beginning of the end of Judaism as the primary means of structure in Judea. These cities, Alexandria, Antioch, Rome, Byzantium, Jerusalem, things are not going well. We're going to see that today in Eusebius. So after Jesus died and rose, his word began to spread. The first missionary journeys occur, and the Romans looked at the Jews as the cause of this, right? If they had to just let the guy go, whatever, he might have a small following, but we wouldn't be dealing with this spread, this martyrdom of this essential God. In addition to Eusebius, I've mentioned the work of Philo to indicate to us that we have another objective primary source talking about these things occurring that's completely out of the Bible itself. What we're going to go over today is hard to title because we're touching on several important things. One, the birth of what we call today eschatology, that is future prophecy, right? When is Christ returning? When will Christ reign? What does it look like for Christ to get his believers from here to heaven? There are many different views about eschatology, not just one. You see today in Eusebius's writing, we're going to hear about one that develops into what is called preterism. And it's on a spectrum: full preterism, partial preterism, and limited preterism. And what preterism is a belief that most of these prophecies took place during the lives of the apostles as they formed the early church, through the period of the persecutions, up to the period of the Council of Nicaea, particularly centering around things like the destruction of the Jewish temple for good in Jerusalem in AD 70. And Daniel had 70 weeks in his prophecy. And much centers on the last week of Daniel and when this was. So much of the prophecy takes place before the book of Revelation is even written. So we see that. We're also going to see a very interesting thing occur today. We're going to see the birth of what might have evolved into Catholic iconography. What I mean by that is it's clear that the earliest Jews, including the Christian sect of Jews, did not worship idols. They didn't believe in idols. You wouldn't have found idols in the temple, anything of the sort. You wouldn't have heard oaths of fealty to civilian leaders. But this is what Rome demanded. And in Alexandria first, they began to put images of the emperor into the Jewish temple and demand fealty by word and oath to it. Eventually, we'd see the same thing in Jerusalem when Pilate was trying to regain control of Judea after having ordered the death of Jesus Christ. We're also going to see examples of Roman propaganda and Christian propaganda. I will give Eusebius credit this far. His writing is not full of this propaganda. You might see every once in a while at the beginning or end of a section, he makes some statement about, oh, the cause of this pain for them was the pain that they had wrought on the Christians. And of course, there's no proof of that, but it's certainly one perspective that might have been right. But as we've addressed, there were a lot of political perspectives that also fueled this. So let's get started. We're looking at chapter 6 of book 2 of the history of the church by Eusebius of Nicomedia. It's called The Misfortunes Which Overwhelmed the Jews After Their Presumption Against Christ. After the death of Tiberius, who, as you remember, was the Roman emperor during the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, Caius received the empire. And besides other innumerable acts of tyranny against many people, he greatly afflicted especially the whole nations of the Jews. These things we learn briefly from the words of Philo, the diplomat, who wrote as follows, quote, "So great was the caprice of Caius in his conduct toward all, and especially toward the nation of the Jews. The latter he so bitterly hated that he appropriated to himself their places of worship in the other cities." When they say other cities, they mean all these centers but Jerusalem. "And beginning with Alexandria, he filled them with images and statues of himself, for in permitting others to erect them, he was really erecting them himself. The temple in the holy city, Jerusalem, which had hitherto been left untouched and had been regarded as an inviolable asylum, he altered and transformed into a temple of his own, that it might be called the temple of the visible Jupiter, the younger Caius." You can see how this is the beginning of the end of the temple culture of the Jews. Innumerable other terrible and almost indescribable calamities which came upon the Jews in Alexandria during the reign of the same emperor are recorded by the same author in his second work, talking about Philo the diplomat, to which he gave the title On the Virtues. With him agrees also Josephus, who likewise indicates that the misfortune of the whole nation began with the time of Pilate and with their daring crimes against the Savior. There we might see an example of Christian propaganda, right? Their crimes against the Savior. Well, yes, the Jews killed Jesus Christ by handing him over to the Romans, but it was essentially politics between the Jews and the Romans. The Romans, they just viewed Christians as another sect of Jews until after the resurrection, when we see the split of the Christians and them beginning to evangelize and spread the gospel. Hear what is said in the second book of his Jewish war, Josephus, where he writes as follows: Pilate, being sent to Judea as procurator by Tiberius, the emperor directly before Caius, secretly carried veiled images of the emperor called ensigns to Jerusalem by night. The following day this caused the greatest disturbance among the Jews, for those who were near were confounded at the sight, beholding their laws as it were trampled underfoot. For they allow no image to be set up in their city. Comparing these things with the writings of the Evangelists, you will see that it is not long before there came upon them the penalty for the exclamation which they uttered under the same Pilate when they cried out that they had no other king but Caesar. During the death of Jesus Christ, we have no other king but Caesar. Get rid of this guy. He's not a friend of Caesar's. Now, do you see how this might be viewed as the birth of iconography, which would later appear in Roman Catholicism, right? Remember, in the 300s, Christianity takes on a statist form in partnership with Rome as a government and adopts its habits. So, it is easy to say this, and I posit a premise that the Christians prior to this time, meaning the very earliest, the first month or two, would have abided by the same laws as the Jews. In fact, Acts chapter 2 says they continued to go to the temple daily, as if to suggest they continued as doing the things they were supposed to do. And they wouldn't have looked out of place. The Christians were over here in the temple, the Zealots were over there, the Nazarenes were over here, the Essenes were over there, the Pharisees were over there. It's not like there were only one sect of Jews with slightly outside views. Do you know what I'm saying? So, anyway, now in Alexandria, Philo tells us Caius wasn't playing that game, and he starts to send iconography into the Jewish temples. Now in Jerusalem, Pilate does the same thing. He starts to send the iconography into the temple in Jerusalem. And here is where we get the birth of eschatology, because many point to Daniel's 70 weeks, right? Some have calculated that the 430 years between the end of the Old Testament, beginning of the New, is that 70 weeks, and that the saga with Jesus Christ up to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD is that 70th week. Notice, we haven't even talked about the book of Revelation yet, and we have all this end time stuff being attributed to the period of time that it was written in. Preterism is only one view of eschatology. The rest are futurist type views, dealing with the Great Tribulation, raptures, the return of Jesus Christ, a 1,000-year reign of Jesus Christ. Some terminology you might hear is the Great Tribulation, the rapture. The rapture is on a spectrum. Pre-trib rapture, pre-tribulation rapture. A-tribulation rapture, meaning people are taken during, or post-tribulation rapture. You have people who disagree about the 1,000-year reign of Jesus and when it's going to occur. Premillenarianism, amillenarianism, postmillenarianism. Eschatology is a whole world with a lot of nomenclature. But it is interesting to note, we've talked about this before. The earliest apostles, when after the resurrection, given the chance to talk and teach about Jesus Christ for the first time, went to Old Testament prophets. That is very interesting to me. And so it certainly is in line with this, but I wanted to point out to see we have two things emerging here now in Eusebius: the birth of eschatology appearing to be preterism, and the birth of Catholic, what would become later Catholic iconography. Comparing these things to the writings of the Evangelists, you will see that it was not long before there came upon them penalty for an exclamation which they had uttered under the same Pilate when they cried out that they had no other king but Caesar. Essentially, again, they're being punished for handing over Jesus Christ, according to Eusebius, right? The same writer further records, Josephus at this time, that after this, another calamity overtook him. He writes, after this, he stirred up another tumult by making use of the holy treasure, which is called Corban, Pilate we're talking about, in the construction of an aqueduct 300 stadia in length. The multitude were greatly displeased at it. And when Pilate was in Jerusalem, they surrounded his tribunal and gave utterance to loud complaints. But he, anticipating the tumult, had distributed through the crowd armed soldiers to use the sword, but commanding them to strike with clubs those who should make outcry. To them he now gave the preconcerted signal from the tribunal. And the Jews being beaten, many of them perished in consequence of the blows, while many others were trampled underfoot by their own countrymen in their flight, and thus lost their lives. But the multitude, overawed by the fate of those who were slain, held their peace. In addition, other tumults which were stirred up in Jerusalem itself, and shows that from the time seditions and wars and mischievous plots followed each other in quick succession, and never ceased in the city in all of Judea, until finally the siege of Vespasian overwhelmed them. 70 AD, the collapse of the temple. Thus the divine vengeance overtook the Jews for the crimes which they dared to commit against Christ. That last sentence is straight Christian propaganda, right? Now, one might say, in wrapping up, that the idea that the Jews were the problem and the Romans were just trying to help and be the good guys, some could say that that's Roman propaganda, and that's worth exploring, and we might see it in future chapters. For this video, that wraps it up. Read the book of Acts again with what we said today in mind, and make sure you watch the next 2 or 3 videos because they're in succession. I just want to keep them shorter. Now, if you'd like to purchase one of the books I've written from a series called Just Tell Me the Truth About Christianity, about the future of the church, the Holy Land Crusades, the early church councils, and one being finished right now on the Reformation and Counter-Reformation, you can purchase those by visiting amazon.com/author/nicholasdgarrett. You can also get my nonfiction, Shipwrecked in the Land of King Tobacco, the first Washington family immigrant to America, which tells the story about George Washington's great-grandfather John and how he established the Washington family here in the colonies. You can also visit our Teespring store and pick up a t-shirt, a cool coffee mug, something like that. Or you can support us on PayPal. We spend a lot of time doing research, and there are costs associated with this work, so if you can give anything as little as $1, it would be very much appreciated. Certainly you're not forced to. I want you to enjoy these videos for free, but at the same time, I commit to you that for every donation I get, I work on the videos that much harder, and I hope it shows. God bless you, my friends, and may your work today bear fruit. I'll talk to you next time.